Okay, so you want to own a greenhouse farm. Rows of tomatoes climbing on trellises under a glowing roof, lettuce growing in tidy hydroponic channels. A business that seems to sidestep almost everything that makes traditional farming brutal. No droughts wiping out a season, no hailstorm flattening a crop overnight, no waiting for one harvest a year and praying the weather cooperates. You control the temperature, the light, the water, the whole environment, which makes it sound like farming with the risk removed. Here's the twist nobody mentions before they pour their savings into steel frames and polycarbonate panels. Controlled environment agriculture, the industry term for what a greenhouse actually is, trades weather risk for one of the most capital-intensive, energy-hungry business models in all of agriculture. Some operators are burning through investor money building beautiful facilities that never turn a profit. A smaller number have figured out exactly which crops, which scale, and which energy strategy actually makes the math work, and they're running some of the quietest, steadiest cash flow businesses in farming. By the end of this, you'll know what it actually costs to build one of these, how the money really moves from seed to shelf, what the hidden costs are that sink operations that looked perfect on paper, and what a realistic year of profit looks like once the glass-roofed fantasy meets the electricity bill. Let's start with what this actually costs to build, because just like every other business we've broken down, greenhouse covers an enormous range of very different bets. At the simplest end sits a basic hoop house or low-tech poly greenhouse, unheated or minimally heated, used mostly to extend a growing season rather than run year-round. These can run as little as $2 to $15 per square foot to put up, and a small operator might get into a few thousand square feet for well under $50,000 total. One tier up is a mid-range commercial greenhouse with proper glazing, basic climate control, and irrigation automation, which typically lands somewhere between $20 and $50 per square foot once you factor in the structure, heating and cooling systems, and irrigation infrastructure. On a per-acre basis, industry estimates for a fully equipped commercial greenhouse commonly land between $20,000 and $50,000 per acre, which sounds almost reasonable until you remember an acre is under a single roof, not spread across open fields. Then there's the high-tech tier, the kind of glass greenhouse used for year-round tomato, cucumber, or leafy green production with full climate control, supplemental lighting, and computerized environmental systems. These facilities can run well into 6 figures per acre, and a serious multi-acre operation with automated systems, CO2 enrichment, and advanced lighting can require anywhere from several million to tens of millions of dollars before a single seed goes into a tray. Some of the most ambitious indoor farming ventures in recent years have required capital requirements in the tens of millions of dollars for facilities in the single-digit acreage range, once you count the building, the mechanical systems, and years of working capital needed to get through the ramp-up period before revenue catches up to the debt payments. So the spectrum runs from a backyard-scale hoop house a determined grower can build for the price of a used car, all the way to an operation that costs more than most people's entire life savings, multiplied many times over, and where you land on that spectrum determines almost everything else about how the business behaves financially. So how does the money actually flow once the greenhouse is up and producing? Here's the part that makes this industry genuinely different from open field farming. A well-run greenhouse can post gross margins in the range of 80 to 90% on the crop itself, because you're not losing a chunk of every harvest to pests, weather damage, or inconsistent yields the way outdoor growers do, and you can often run multiple growing cycles a year instead of just one. That sounds spectacular until you realize gross margin on the crop is not the same thing as operating profit, and the gap between those two numbers in greenhouse farming is almost entirely explained by 2 words: energy and debt. Heating, cooling, and especially supplemental lighting for a climate-controlled facility can eat an enormous share of revenue, and industry cost breakdowns on advanced controlled environment operations regularly show energy consuming somewhere around half or more of total revenue once a facility is running lights and climate systems year-round. Layer debt service on top of that, since almost nobody is building one of these facilities in cash. and a large operation carrying tens of millions in construction debt can see its genuinely excellent gross margin get compressed down to an operating margin in the range of 15 to 20% once financing costs are accounted for. That's still a real business, but it's a dramatically different number than the headline margin makes it look like. Crop selection matters enormously here too. Leafy greens and herbs turn over multiple harvest cycles a year and can be priced at a premium for freshness and local sourcing, while a crop like microgreens can generate especially high revenue density per square foot because of how fast it cycles and how much a restaurant or grocery buyer will pay for it. Tomatoes and cucumbers, the classic greenhouse staples, produce reliably but compete more directly against large-scale imported produce, which caps how much of a premium you can actually charge. The operators who do best are the ones who treat crop selection as a financial decision first and a horticultural one second, choosing what to grow based on revenue per square foot and cycle speed, rather than simply what's traditional to grow in a greenhouse. Now for the stuff nobody warns you about before they break ground. First, energy price volatility. A greenhouse that pencils out beautifully at one electricity or natural gas rate can become unprofitable within a single season if energy prices spike, and unlike a lot of businesses, you can't simply pass that cost straight through to a grocery buyer who has other suppliers to choose from. Second, the ramp-up period is longer and more expensive than almost anyone budgets for. It routinely takes a year or more for a new facility to reach full production efficiency, as growers dial in the specific environmental recipe for their crops and their building, and during that entire window, you're paying full debt service and full labor costs against partial revenue. Third, labor is far more intensive than the automated glass-walled marketing images suggest. Planting, harvesting, packing, and quality control in a high-density greenhouse operation require skilled labor hours that scale directly with square footage, and labor commonly represents one of the largest line items after energy, especially for labor-intensive crops like leafy greens that need to be hand-harvested and packed quickly to preserve shelf life. Fourth, equipment failure carries outsized consequences. A climate control system or CO2 injection system failing overnight in a high-tech facility can damage or destroy an entire crop cycle within hours, not days, which is a very different risk profile than an outdoor farm where a single bad night rarely wipes out everything at once. Fifth, market access and distribution are harder to lock in than people expect. A greenhouse operator can grow a beautiful, consistent product year-round, but without a secured buyer, whether that's a grocery chain contract, a restaurant network, or a direct-to-consumer subscription program, that consistent supply can flood a small local market faster than demand can absorb it, pushing prices down right when the facility finally hits full production. So who's actually winning at this? At the large end, well-capitalized regional operators supplying grocery chains with tomatoes, peppers, and leafy greens have built real, durable businesses by locking in multi-year retail contracts before they even finish construction, which gives them predictable revenue to plan energy hedging and labor scheduling around. Some of the most ambitious venture-backed indoor farming companies of the past decade expanded aggressively on the promise of year-round local produce, and a number of them ran into exactly the trap described above: enormous facilities, ramp-up periods longer than projected, and energy costs that ate margins faster than efficiency gains could offset them, leading to well-publicized closures and restructurings even at facilities that looked technologically impressive. At the smaller end, operators running a few thousand square feet focused on high-value herbs, microgreens, or specialty crops sold directly to local restaurants and farmers markets have found a genuine advantage because they can charge a real premium for freshness and locality without needing the enormous capital stack that crushes larger competitors, and their energy footprint per dollar of revenue is often far more forgiving. The pattern across the industry is consistent. The operators who succeed aren't necessarily the ones with the most impressive facility. They're the ones who size their build to match a realistic revenue plan instead of building first and figuring out the market later. How do people actually lose money on this? Almost nobody fails because their tomatoes taste bad or their lettuce doesn't grow. They fail because they built a facility sized for a market that couldn't absorb the output, or because they modeled energy costs at a rate that didn't survive the first winter, or because the ramp-up period ran twice as long as projected, while debt payments kept coming due regardless of yield. The single most common trap is treating construction cost as the finish line rather than the starting line, when in reality, the real financial test of a greenhouse only begins once the lights turn on and the meter starts running. Okay, so what can you actually walk away with? Take a realistic small to mid operation, roughly 1 acre under glass, growing a mix of leafy greens and herbs for local grocery and restaurant accounts. Recent financial modeling on operations at this scale shows gross margins around 90% on the crop itself. But once energy, labor, and debt service on a build that can run into 8 figures are factored in, operating margins commonly settle in the range of 15 to 20%, translating to annual profit somewhere in the neighborhood of $140,000 to $250,000. Once the facility is fully ramped and running efficiently, a solid but far more modest number than the eye-catching gross margin suggests on its own. Now the stronger version. An operator who scales from that single acre to several acres over a number of years spreads the same fixed facility and administrative costs across a much larger revenue base, which is consistently the single most effective lever for improving the bottom line in this industry, since the fixed costs of climate control infrastructure don't scale linearly with square footage the way people assume. An operation that successfully scales this way, while keeping crop waste below the industry's typical loss rates and locking in stable energy contracts, can see that same 15 to 20% operating margin climb meaningfully higher, turning a modest 6-figure profit into a genuinely strong annual return relative to the capital invested. So yeah, you can start growing tomatoes under glass this season if you want to. Most people who try the high-tech version of this business will get squeezed between an energy bill that doesn't care about their business plan and a market that won't pay an unlimited premium for local produce, no matter how impressive the facility looks in photos. The ones who make it work aren't the ones with the most advanced climate control system in the region. They're the ones who sized the build to the market, planned for the ramp-up to take longer than hoped, and treated every square foot as a financial decision from day one, not just a horticultural one.